Welcome to the Work Done Right podcast, where we talk with industry professionals to discuss best practices in construction, manufacturing, and maintenance. I am your host, Wes Edmiston, Director of Product with Cumulus Digital Systems and 15-year construction industry veteran. Our guest today is Alice Leung. Alice is the Vice President of Platform and Product Strategy at Brick Mortar Ventures, where she works with portfolio companies, new startups, industry professionals, and investors to invest in the most impactful and promising startups that the construction industry needs. Alice previously worked at DPR Construction and currently volunteers her time on the boards of American Institute of Architects, San Francisco chapter, and Building Transformations. Alice received her Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering from Brown University, and through her experience and education, has a unique perspective on the relationship between quality and technology. Alice, welcome to the show. Hey, so I'm sure a lot of people have heard of Alice Leung, but maybe not as many people have heard of Brick Mortar Ventures. Could you tell me a bit about what it is that you and you all at Brick Mortar are doing?
Yeah, Brick Mortar Ventures is a construction technology focused venture capital firm based in San Francisco. So we invest in early stage construction technology startups, and the way that we define construction tech is really around the construction process. So we invest in technologies and companies that are really solving the underlying productivity layer when it comes to building and maintaining stuff. And that usually spans between the design phase through the construction phase and even into the operations and maintenance phase.
Now, how is it that you got involved in brick and mortar, and can you tell me a little bit more about your past?
I come from the construction industry. I knew nothing about venture capital when I first joined, and I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, but my background is in construction. I was recruited to DPR while in college, and I knew nothing about construction at that time too, because I studied engineering. Thinking that I would go work for a car company. I thought I was going to get into automotive engineering, but took this chance to go work for DPR here in the San Francisco Bay Area and just absolutely loved my internship. Just being out on the construction side and seeing things get built and getting to work with these superintendents that a lot of people say are, old and rickety, but, the superintendents were a wealth of knowledge. And I was fortunate that a lot of these superintendents just, really liked explaining things and teaching and just talking about construction and what was happening in the field. So I really fell in love with being out on site and seeing things get built and just doing a lot of problem solving in construction. I feel like that's kind of the main thing that you do as a general contractor is you're trying to manage, all of this information and you're trying to problem solve on a day-to-day basis. And during my time in industry, and I think part of this is just growing up around computers and technology. I loved the technology side, so my role was always in operations, but I've always liked trying to find new technologies and new tools to make my workflows a lot more efficient. So one can say that I am very impatient, and I just felt like I was doing a lot of the same thing over and over again. So clicking, a million buttons to get one thing done and whatnot. So it was during my time in DPR when I first got exposed to startups. And that was, this was back in, 2011 when construction tech really wasn't a thing. And I was working with some of these startups, really, as an end user, utilizing their tech, implementing the tech and providing a ton of feedback, more just out of, asking for people to help build me stuff so that, it makes my life easier. Frankly, that's how I thought. But that ended up leading me into this career where I was very involved with BIM, VDC, technology, innovation, and just got, introduced to more and more startups, was part of the ecosystem. And ultimately got to a point in my career where I was looking for a change. I was interested in doing something that had a bigger impact to industry, and frankly, some of the frustrations around reinventing the wheel from project to project, and setting up these processes that some people may or may not follow, and just some of the challenges around technology adoption and process. And that's what led me to go look for a construction tech startup to join, and through those conversations ended up getting this opportunity at Brick and Mortar Ventures, and now I get to work with many different startups and industry, and I think that's probably the most fun part of my job is I get to work across technology industry and kind of sit in the space where I just have a lot of opportunity to learn and get to know problems and try to find those solutions.
What are some of the problems that you saw whenever you were on project that you think that maybe technology could help to fill a space in? A lot of companies these days, and I'm sure that you've heard the phrase said before, that some companies are a solution that are looking for a problem, right? But that doesn't fail to bring up the fact that there are definitely problems that are out there that are still available to be solved with technology. Is there anything that you recall from your experience that jumps out as a major issue that could be solved through tech?
Yeah, so first, the solutions looking for a problem. We see a lot of those in the startup ecosystem, and frankly, it is a pretty big red flag. If there's some really cool cutting edge tech, like we should use blockchain for blah, 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 right? And it's well, let's unpack that and really understand the underlying technology and why we need to do that. So even in our approach, we've always started by talking to the industry, understanding the industry, having empathy for the industry, and really understanding what are those problems that the people who are boots on the ground really facing from a day-to-day basis. And a lot of those problems do revolve around quality control. And, it may seem really easy that, these buildings get put up and, you could see things change from a day-to-day basis. But I think for those who are not in the weeds and not in the day-to-day, you don't really see what is causing the slowdown or what is causing the efficiency losses and whatnot. And I think anytime people read news articles about construction, it's always, something goes wrong, like there's a utility strike or we lose power or, the so-and-so project was over budget, it was delayed, right? And I think the industry is definitely plagued by all of these things. And when I look at it, a lot of it goes down to poor risk management. I think construction is all about risk management, and quality control is a big part of that too. And quality just fits into so many different pieces around that. And particularly around quality, just some of the, I don't want to call it low-hanging fruit because it just seems like it's very obvious, but it's also a really hard problem to solve, is, just people are building off of old information. And it's actually hard to solve because on a construction site, one can say, oh, you just need cloud-based solutions and then everything will be real time and this and that, right? But on the construction site, there's no Wi-Fi. There's no cell service. How are you going to use these quote unquote cloud-based systems in an environment where you actually cannot connect to anything? So just some of the challenges around, the construction site and what leads to people building off of old information, whether it's, changes in design or a stop work order or whatever it is, that whole thing needs to get kind of unpacked. But I think it's definitely an opportunity for technology to solve that. And another big kind of area that technology can help with is kind of this missing feedback loop between the field and the office, right? So I think with BIM and VDC, we've seen a lot of people try to do, we're going to build this digitally and then we can, physically build this off of what we've already figured out virtually, right? But in reality, what gets built on site is not necessarily what has been drawn in the drawings or put in the model, right? So there's this kind of feedback loop that's missing around that quality piece around, what was installed? Is it installed in the right place? Is it the right thing that's been installed? And a lot of those workflows are still either paper-based or it's just visual checks or whatever. So I think there's a big opportunity to kind of understand, all the different bits and pieces of that feedback loop and how do you leverage technologies, whether it's, IoT tools or reality capture or whatever, to really help bring that feedback loop back and just to make sure that what we're building is actually what we're supposed to build.
So you touched on something that I want to come back to here in a minute, which is, some of these challenges that we have with deploying some of these technologies and what you've seen, especially since, with your role that you have now, you touch on so many different companies, right? So I'm sure that you get information from each and every one of them and we can take those lessons out of it. But are there any technologies that you're seeing that are doing maybe a better job than others at helping to bridge this gap in quality? Quality is something that I do have a big passion at. I was a quality person for many years within Shell. So I I'm keen on assuring that projects are built correctly, right? But is there anything in the technology space that you're seeing, like I said, that maybe stands out as doing a better job than others that people can look for?
Yeah, I think for sure, just looking at hardware, I know in this, like, I guess from a venture capital perspective and a technology perspective, hardware is hard. Everyone says hardware is hard. But when it comes to construction and building things and maintaining things, at the end of the day, it's a physical process that, these people in the field need to go and put something together. They need to go check something. They need to go verify something. And we can build as many software technologies as we want, but if the person in the field doesn't want to use it, that's a challenge, right? So I think one part of it is ease of implementation, and the other part of it is, really what's in it for the person that's using the tool, right? If you're building something that's not value add to that person, chances are they're not going to use your tool. So just thinking about the types of technologies that can kind of bridge the gap between the physical world and the digital world and can add value to the person who's using the tools, whether it's, providing them feedback on whether or not, they're doing it properly, or providing them feedback on, quality, quality or productivity, right? I think when we build good technologies around quality, it really has to focus on the person doing the work and making sure that, everything is easy for them and that this is something that they really want to use.
There are definitely times throughout the day when you're wandering around looking for the right information, looking for somebody to be able to give you information, right? So to have even things like contemporarily the correct information for what it is that you're doing, like you were saying, revision control, items like that. There's definitely, like you said, low-hanging fruit out there that people can be grasping toward in order to really provide value back to the industry. Are there, you touched on really well things like the users, wanting to adopt and use a system, something being in it for them, ease of use. And oftentimes those are barriers for a lot of other companies to be able to deploy technologies. Maybe the UI isn't very user friendly. Maybe it is that it takes additional equipment or additional time to use something. Are there any other barriers that you're frequently seeing that's preventing technology from being deployed on sites, or is maybe discouraging users from adopting?
Yeah, on a higher level, cost is definitely a big thing. And how do you look at the cost and calculate the ROI? So we've looked at, just generally speaking, IoT for construction over the last, for the life of brick and mortar, really. And what we hear from contractors is that, these sensors are too expensive, or people don't want to put on these sensors or whatever it is, right? But a lot of the times it's like, well, if these sensors cost, even if they were $5 each and you need to place a $5 sensor on every piece of equipment, right? Or something like that, right? That all adds up. And that kind of, when you calculate the ROI of whether or not we want to adopt this tech, what is the value that you're getting, right? Yeah, maybe you're tracking, where the materials are and whatnot, but there are more inexpensive ways of doing that, or more kind of just unique ways of doing that you could probably get the same information. So that kind of ties back to, solutions looking for a problem. It's like, oh, we have all these sensors now. How do we take advantage of these sensors? And I don't necessarily know if we've figured out exactly, matching the right types of sensors for the right type of accuracy, costs, whether it's, updated, in real time or updated every 15 minutes or whatever it is. So there's always this balancing act when it comes to IoT implementation. So I think, cost is definitely a big piece of it. And I'm not saying if it's an expensive sensor, it will not get implemented. I think tying that with ROI, the value that whether it's the worker that's getting or the value that the company is getting by capturing that data is very important.
One thing that I've noticed, and I wonder if you've seen the same thing with companies, is we'll use an example of something like sensors, right? Of tracking equipment, tracking material, or a sensor that goes attached to a piece of equipment that's going to be for operations. Somebody might I've seen oftentimes where people will have like this binary response where it's either full bore yes or 100% no, right? And I feel like there's opportunity in order to do a better kind of risk analysis and kind of ROI on particular equipment, on particular materials, on taking like in the quality world, we take a risk-based approach toward inspection, right? And then we can scale down from there. Do you see companies that are out there that are actually taking that sort of approach toward implementation of technologies, or are you seeing the same thing where it's kind of we're either going to do it or we're not going to do it, and there's not a lot of negotiation in between?
Yeah, I think I probably see the same, and I think that's definitely one of the challenges of the construction industry. But I think if you figured out the product and you figured out how to like tell the story behind the ROI, that'll probably drive a lot of people in one direction versus the other. And I think, like when we work with startups, we make sure that as they're looking at the overall construction industry, you really have to hone in on what is that ideal customer profile. Is it, a GC? Is it a subcontractor? And even within GCs and subcontractors, what is the size of the company? Within that company, who are the specific roles of people who may be the best suited to adopt this technology or whatever, right? And then sometimes the user of this technology is not necessarily the decision maker of the tech implementation either, right? And I think that's one of the challenges of our industry, but also it's a great opportunity where if you really understand your customers well and you can position the product in a way that is value for many people on the same construction site, that can lead to network effects or just, a lot more excitement around some type of technology. And the cool thing about construction is it's so relationship based, and there's so many people in construction that talk to other people in construction that if it's really something that's game changing and helping the field and helping us build better, I think people will share that with their friends. Like I know I used to do that. Like when I was at DPR, when I found great technologies, I like wanted to share it with everyone. I was like, oh my God, this is the best thing. It's like saved me so much time. And a lot of the times you're talking to construction people and you're venting about, issues on site or, this happened or that happened or, complaining about designers or whatever it is, right? So, people in construction talk to a lot of other people in construction. And I think when you can have those kind of happy moments where a tool and a technology is very value add, I think it'll just kind of spread organically pretty quickly.
Hey, real quick, this is Wes. I just wanted to let you know that if you have an idea for an episode topic or a great guest suggestion, we would love to hear from you. Just send us an email at workdoneright@cumulusds.com. Now, back to the show. I would agree with that. There's actually there's several technologies that I'm thinking about that I either deployed myself on projects or that I had other people tell me about that once it got on site or once somebody deployed it, it just spread like wildfire, and seemingly everybody's doing it now, right? At least anybody that I was connected to in industrial oil and gas. Bringing back toward the conversation toward quality, are there any quality topics out there? Are there any areas of quality control that you don't think can be solved by technology, or do you think that it's a pretty greenfield open space where any of these issues we could potentially be solving through technology?
Yeah, this is almost like a chicken and an egg thing, where I always put. So I forget where this is from. I know Stanford Sci-Fi has this when we talk around BIM and VDC, this kind of three-pronged approach of implementing, I guess, change, right? So change in general. There's people, process, and technology. I'm sure this is not just in construction, and it's probably taught somewhere else. But when I look at people, process, and technology, and how that relates to, things that maybe technology should or should not solve, we always have to start with the process. And I think this is where it's almost a chicken and an egg thing, because there are certain times when technology can drive process, but there are also certain times where you just don't have a process and you need the process before you could build the technology around it. And I think quality is one of those things where not even depending on company, but depending on who it is that's on site, there's just such a wide range of how people manage quality, because every company has a quality plan of some sort, right? Whether it's an ISO, whatever, if we're overseas, there's quality management plans there. Within construction, there's probably quality managers that have created plans to implement on site, right? But I feel like a lot of people talk about quality, but not everyone really understands it and or lives by it. So part of me is like, things that technology can't solve are like, communication and education around why quality is important, but not just why it's important, but this is why we do certain things, right? Like if you just give someone a quality manual and say, here, follow it, check the box, right? That doesn't really help with the understanding part. And I think that's where training, education, and just like having accountability and buy-in, it's all these like people side of things that are really important to driving that process, which then, allows you to adopt technology to streamline that process. I think like on that process side, we really need to, whether it's training or as an industry as a whole, try to figure out how do you define that in a way so that process can also transfer from project to project. And I think that's one of the reasons why we don't see a lot of technologies around quality, is that it's just such a misunderstood big part of our industry.
No, that's fair. That there's always the human element, right? And in no way, I think, does anybody want to remove that aspect of it. But it's how do we improve? How do we educate? And maybe technology can help in that space, and maybe it can't. But one way or another, it's definitely people. Talking also about maybe there aren't a lot of solutions out there that are looking at quality. Maybe we can also bring this back into how do you calculate your ROI for some of these things. Quality is kind of this almost ethereal sort of thing, right? Like it's hard to quantify in the sense of what is the cost of doing something incorrectly, and what's the likelihood of doing something incorrectly. How much, if I'm reducing your quality defects, any discontinuities that you may be having, how much am I actually saving you? Because we don't do a great job all the time of capturing rework, and there's oftentimes this quick pushback of saying, well, we don't have these problems. What do you think we can do as an industry to maybe better recognize some of these areas where there is a risk, and maybe quantify what a potential ROI would be from implementing a higher quality solution?
Yeah, I think so. Anything that's preventative is so hard to sell, right? And like one of my favorite examples of this is BIM, building information modeling. There's a big push in the industry like 20-ish years ago where they were talking about everyone should adopt BIM, right? You're able to build this virtually, and then you could build it physically, and then you find all your issues on the computer so that when you build it on site, you're not making mistakes, you're reducing rework, and because a mistake in the field costs a lot more than a mistake in the digital space. So when that pitch has been going on for 20 years, and what percentage of construction projects are actually implementing BIM properly? This is my personal opinion based on talking to BIM managers and talking to people on construction sites. I'm pretty sure it's less than 5%. Around the world, that's implementing properly. It's probably less than 5%, but I'm being optimistic because I know there are certain countries around the world that have more stringent requirements, and there are some really, really big projects that you kind of can only build it with BIM. So when I think about that, it's preventative stuff. How do you convince people that you need to use something that's preventative? And that's really, really hard to do. So when it comes to quality, I think you almost need to so it has to be preventative, but not in the sense of preventing the bad stuff, but maybe think of it we need to prevent the physical thing from even doing to begin with by focusing on the process and the step by step so that people do it right the first time. So it's not that, if you do XYZ, then you will avoid rework. It's let's just get it done right at the beginning. So how do you build technology into the workflow itself? And it's not just, we're going to do it digital and I'm going to give you drawings and then you're going to go build it off the drawings, right? How do you actually integrate the technology into the actual workflow of the actually physically doing things?
Yeah, breaking it down step by step by step, right?
Exactly. So how do you do that? So it's almost like foolproof, right? It's like if I could build a technology so that you can never fail in any step that you do, I think that's also a quality control process. And there are definitely ways to do that, whether it is tying it to hardware or tying it to IoT or whatever it is, right? So there's definitely a software and a hardware component to that. And before you even get there is planning. So I guess this also goes back to the people side where, we need to make sure that people are properly planning all of these different workflows and tasks in a way that you can almost create this, perfect plan and then try to, use some type of technology to like make sure that people don't deviate from that plan.
It's definitely a greenfield area for anybody that's making some new technologies. I know, we do a bit of that here at Cumulus, but still there's definitely more areas that we can cover with it. Are there, you do touch a lot of different technologies with brick and mortar. What are some of the technologies, whether we're talking about that solve quality problems that are looking at maybe AI and machine learning, that's the big new thing these days. What is it that you're most excited about for new technologies and what areas are you hoping that you continue to see solutions popping up?
Yeah. So I think, on the AI machine learning side, I think there's definitely opportunity there and it's coming. I think it's a matter of when. And I think in the construction industry, we can't really skip steps. And the reason I bring this up is a lot of the industry is still going from paper-based workflows to digital workflows. So if you skip all the way to, I'm going to do AI, ML, blah, 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 right? Like, you don't even have data to do that. Like, frankly, how are you going to AI ML your, paper task sheets or paper,
Right. Yeah, no, you're right.
So I think it's coming, but we have a couple more steps that we need to take before we get there. But the great thing is by the time the construction industry is ready for it, there will probably be all of these other, use cases. The technologies will be a lot more mature and, all that. So I think from a timing perspective, we as the construction industry will be able to very inexpensively reap the benefits of all that research dollar that's going into, all these adjacent industries around AI and ML. But in terms of technologies that we have today, we are seeing more hardware and robotics companies. And I feel like I've been preaching like hardware and I keep going back to, we have to build physical things. And if there are technologies out there that, can do this quality control process that, allows us to build things properly the first time around, like that's what we need. And, I'm not just saying that because I'm excited about Cumulus and I love Cumulus, but it's like, one of those things that like, it just makes so much sense, right? Bluetooth enabled torque wrench, like let's integrate it into this super detailed step-by-step workflow. And let's just make sure that we build the damn thing right from the beginning, right? Let's just make no room for error. And like around that, there are companies like Rugged Robotics. So we invested in Rugged Robotics as well. And they call themselves a layout Roomba, but really what they're doing, like really what they are is they're a piece of serving equipment almost. So they are able to, understand localization on a construction site and they're doing layout. That's the first thing that they're starting with is layout. And they are translating, all the hard work that we've done digitally into the physical space so that there is no question around, hey, did I put this in the right place? You really can't mess up on that because it's drawn on the floor. Like you should be here. And there's no question around that, right? So it's kind of taking a little bit of that human error out of it. And that's just the beginning for that, localization platform, right? The goal is that you can build, whether it's, arms to drill holes or, maybe you're drilling hangers or maybe you're pulling wire or whatever it is, right? So yeah, having solved that localization piece and trying to bridge the gap between digital and physical, I think that also is a kind of quality control tool. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, like quality is one of those things that a lot of people talk about, but implementation is really hard. So if we're able to kind of force the quality into the overall process using external tools, I think that's a big win for the industry.
Yeah, I like that you keep bringing up not just these digital solutions, but kind of where it is the rubber meets the road, right? Where we have digital meeting the physical world and actually getting into building the product, because having a million digital solutions does not do it. Honestly, it doesn't do a damn thing as far as building a project, right? Like we need to build the project. So how are we going to build it better? Actually, with that said, are there any other solutions that Brick and Mortar has that helps out in that space with actually physically building the project? Any other technologies that you can think of?
Yeah, so Canvas is a really good example too. They're a little bit later stage than Rugged Robotics, but Canvas is a drywall finishing robot. So they are, they're out there doing real work. And I think that's the interesting thing is like, can you have some type of hardware technology that is a step change for industry? And the reason why Canvas is step change is that they've actually reduced the number of days that it takes to finish a wall from 7 days to like 3 days or something like that. And that's because they actually changed the process of drywall finishing. So when it comes to innovation in construction, it's like you can have, a million software tools, but I feel like software almost feels so incremental in the sense that like, like maybe I'll communicate a little bit easier. Or like maybe I'll cut out, 2 button clicks, right? But if you can fundamentally change the critical path of a construction site by whether it's doing all the layout in 1 day versus a week, or reducing the time to finish the walls from a week to 3 days, like that's a step change, and that pulls days out of our schedule, and that increases productivity so much. And it's also safer for our workers. Like with Canvas, they have a vacuum built into the sanding arm.
Oh, really?
So it's a safer, cleaner construction site. There isn't dust everywhere. And instead of, you see the workers holding the trowels or holding equipment and hurting their shoulders and their arms trying to finish a wall.
Yeah, climbing up on ladders and everything else as well.
Exactly, and it's dangerous. Now these workers are operating this new piece of machinery that is doing kind of the hard work of the finishing. And it's also reducing the kind of skill that you need to do the wall finishing. And we all know that there's skilled labor shortage, and we can't get enough of these workers that know how to finish a wall really nicely to work on our site. So it's like, okay, now you're able to solve that problem. There's just so many like things around quality, safety, productivity, and empowering the workers by, providing them with the tools that they need and also augmenting the way that they work in a better way. That is just so exciting about hardware and robotics.
No, I'm right there with you. There's, like you said, there's in industry a skilled labor shortage, but beyond that, there are a lot of projects that are popping up. There's a lot of infrastructure projects that are popping up, and don't get me wrong, I am all for keeping as many people as employed as possible. I don't want the robots to come in and take over, but realistically, there's not enough time to allow effectively to build all these projects before big parts of our infrastructure are effectively wasting away, right? And there's just not enough people to build the projects. So, solutions like that sound fantastic. We'll definitely make sure that we put a link to Brick and Mortar Ventures in the show notes. That way we can highlight any other great products that are out there. That's really exciting to hear all of these hardware-based solutions that are out there. Alice, we're coming right up on time. We're gonna wrap up by asking some of our rapid fire questions just to get to know Alice the person, not just Alice the professional. So whenever you're ready, Alice, what's your favorite book?
So growing up, my favorite book was Oryx and Crake by Margaret Atwood. But right now I'm actually reading this book called Hyperion. That's very interesting. So you can kind of tell I like the sci-fi dystopian.
What is the one word that best describes you?
I would say impatient. I think that's been a big part of me that's probably got me where I am.
I'm sure it served you well on projects, right? Like, what are we waiting for? Let's just get this done.
Yeah, let's go. Let's get it done. Come on. Chop, let's go.
That's right. What song do you listen to whenever you need to get motivated? But it doesn't sound like you need it. It sounds like you're already just ready to go.
So the most recent one is actually Miley Cyrus "Flowers." Don't read into it too much on the lyrics, but like it's just such a like poppy song.
I just wrote it down. I will listen to it as soon as we finish this episode. Where's your favorite place that you've traveled?
Myanmar. So this was back in, I think I traveled 2016 or 2017. Yeah, right as it kind of opened up to tourism. It was just a very different place versus anywhere else that I've traveled to.
Interesting. Cats or dogs?
Cats. I have a cat. I have a Bengal cat named Newton.
And then what is your favorite podcast? We're on a podcast. Might as well ask the question.
Favorite podcast? Probably the what is it called? After Hours. It's a part of the HBS. I guess now it's part of TED Audio Collective, but it's a couple of Harvard Business School professors that get together to talk about like culture, latest business news and whatnot. I actually listened to it before I joined Brick Mortar because I was just always interested in the business side of things. And I think just some of the interesting insights about like what's going on in the world.
Yeah, it's for anybody who hasn't listened to it, I highly recommend. It's really good. If you could have dinner with any one person in the world, living or dead, who would it be?
Probably Sir Isaac Newton.
It has been a blast having you here. Thank you very much for joining us on the show. I hope we can do this again sometime.
Thank you for the great conversation.
Yeah, hey, have a great one. I hope you have enjoyed listening to this episode of the Work Done Right podcast. Please help us out by subscribing and leaving us a review. And as always, our show notes are linked in this episode's description. Thank you for listening and see you next time.